Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, the 2nd of August, and you are watching Regional Wrap, episode 97. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, the erosion of property rights, is my guest, Jim Willmott, President of Property Rights Australia. Jim is a long-time defender of property rights for regional communities. Inspired by his love of rural Queensland, Jim has led many systems. Jim has played an active role in many organisations, standing up to the government and commercial entities that ride roughshod over people's livelihoods and property rights. He now leads the Property Rights Australia, a grassroots organisation that supports local communities whose property rights are under threat and strives to make their voices heard. Jim joined the Property Rights Australia because he wanted to help protect the hard-earned property rights of farmers and other land holders. He believes in enduring private property rights are the fundamental to the prosperity and sustainability of rural and regional Australia. It also affects urban communities across Australia, which are now under threat as well. He is now part of an organisation that is standing up to defend and protect the properties now and for the future generations. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me.
If you could just start off, give us a bit of background about yourself, maybe a bit of your misspent youth, and also your other employment roles, and then how you entered into the Property Rights Australia.
Yeah, no worries, Bill. First off, I was born in actually Mandurah, Western Australia, so I'm a sand groper. But my mum was a shearer cook. My mum was a shearer's cook, and my dad a shearer. So we moved out of Western Australia quite young and went to Darwin, and just left there before Cyclone Tracy hit when I was a young fella, and moved to Maryborough and then to Gympie. My dad managed Dunlop IPC stores. That's why we moved around after we left Perth. But from there, we've gone into like small cropping and beef production with our family there around the Gympie district, and we've stayed there for a number of years. I went to Gatton College and did certificate, CERTI in agriculture and applied science in, believe it or not, seed technology, agronomy. From there, I got a job. My first job was with the Department of Lands, where I was heavily involved in the management of invasive species. And from there I moved like Rockhampton, Blackall, Longreach. And when I was based in Emerald, we did a lot of work with plague pest species. I did a few locust plagues and a mice plague in Dalby as well. So from there, got a senior policy position in Brisbane. My mates said I shouldn't go to Brisbane, I wouldn't like it, and they were right, but I went anyway. And developed some policies. One of them was a whole of government policy for the management of pests on state land back in the early 2000s. Have received a number of rewards, one from Premier Beattie for our work with in central Queensland, where we actually prevented a plague of locusts. So it was the first time that's ever been achieved, but that was many years ago. Done a fair bit of work for local government in that biosecurity type space, and I do some consulting still to this day, and also worked with local government in northern New South Wales and at a national level too when it comes to invasive species management. So that, I guess that's my speciality, biosecurity, but also growing up as a young fellow, like also on the farm, going to Gatton College, going out west, and just dealing day to day with people in regards to biosecurity issues. I built up a very healthy respect for people's property rights. I was with the state government for about 8 years, and that was in a period, if people can cast their minds back to when, and I remember the Director General of what was called then the Department of Natural Resources saying to me, they called us all into a meeting one day and said, we're going to change the way we do business, people. We're going to change to a like regional service delivery, which the department was back then. They were quite, when we had a really good DPI and we had very active invasive species campaigns as well. We went to a purely purchaser provider model, and with a government that's really focused on legislative, strategic policy and regulation, and that's exactly what it's turned into now. So how did I get involved in groups like PRA? I was one of the founding members of the Green Shirts movement, and was involved in that and did a lot of work with against the Labor government, especially on the fire ant front. And that's become very topical again quite recently with Minister Furner's horseshoe, strategy, trying to stop the spread of them. So that led me really to Property Rights Australia as well, because and people who own any type of land, whether rural or urban, should be able to see their rights diminishing as private property owners. And I can really see it back from the late 90s to now, and just what freedoms we've given away, and what regulatory burdens being placed on us as private landowners, whether you live in town or you own a big rural spread. It's getting diminished every day. So yeah, that's a bit of my background, Bill.
I think a lot of people in urban Australia haven't really got much of a issue with land rights, because most of them are either are renters and the land doesn't matter to them, or they own their own house and a bit of land, and they have freehold, and they, other than the North Shore in regards to planning permits and a few other things, it's still my house is my castle. That's the theory they still hold. But obviously that's going to change dramatically, as we've seen in West Australia very soon. But just sticking back to Queensland and the past, and then we'll move forward to these issues. I think the first time people were really aware of a lot of issues in regards to rural property rights, farmers' property rights, especially in our region, in regards to what you can and can't do, really stemmed out of things through reef protection, and then prior to that, land management care. And it's also become like these things are now generated out of some office in Brisbane, and they're not really there to enhance production or make life easier or make us more profitable or anything like that. They do seem to now be completely restricted. And as you said, the old DPI, I've heard really good things from people in regards to how much they sort of helped to progress development of properties and gave real good information. But now it's almost, we've got an adversarial government that's sort of making a sort of, oh, here's a load of regulations, obey it, and that's it. Is that interpretation right? Is my view, or just overview, simplistic as it is, sort of the picture?
Definitely. And I guess from my perspective, over the last 20 years with local governments, state governments have been involved, and you can see that regulation, they've moved to real more from a partnership approach and collaboration to more of a big stick approach. For them to say, well, we'll never use this type of like these powers in the legislation, whether it's the Veg Act or then reef regulations. Well, mate, why have a hammer in your toolkit if you're not going to use the bloody thing? And that's just ridiculous. So, yeah, look, and the government has pulled it out and used that hammer plenty of times. Look at PRA, our history, and that's how we were actually formed back in 2003 when, the Veg Act was out in 99, Beattie's Veg Act. And the way it was put together and rolled out really put a lot of regional Queenslanders offside. We thought it was going to be a partnership, collaborative approach, and it was anything but. And we've been suffering with the same type of attitude from state government ever since. So it's more, like you said, Bill, good wording, more of an adversary approach where you might have lived on your land for generations. You might be practicing best management. You might be accredited. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in listening to your point of view and all the knowledge and understanding that you build up on the land because they know best. They know what their models are telling them. They know what they've learned at university, and they would know more than you and I, Bill. So that's what's frustrating a lot of landowners as well, that their views aren't taken into account. And this is why you get this kind of really pathetic policy application and a lot of issues coming out of that because their whole policy development cycle fails to take in the real views socially, economically and environmentally of rural and regional people. So when the rubber does hit the road, it's producing a lot of perverse outcomes that are actually bad for the environment, bad for your bottom line, and bad socially. So it's the reverse of what they really wanted to happen. And you'll never get that with the big stick approach anyway, and that's what the government still hasn't learned to this day.
The other thing is, do you think there's also outside influences as well on the government, rather than just the government getting input from people who've got a bit of a whinge on the land or something, but actually outside organisations, non-government organisations and maybe even international type bodies that sort of have overbearing influence on the policy making and its alignment, rather than the function of actually the government's supposed to be of the people and all that sort of stuff, but it's really enacting things for a particular group.
Oh, look, that's right. These NGOs and non-government organisations have far too much, what's the word for it, I guess, influence on government policy development. And it's really unbalanced. When they have so much influence, their views are listened to so much more than people from rural advocacy groups that are in touch with their members. Groups like ours, we put in heaps of submissions, cane growers, whatever. The NGOs and the environmental NGOs have far too much influence. And really, you think, oh, Jim, that's a bit of a cop-out. But when you listen to ministers and how they're briefed and they explain the rationale that underpins a certain policy decision or legislative instrument, you can see from what they're discussing and justifying to you that they've got no idea. And that, to me, is that
they've learned it from astonishing.
Definitely, they've only listened to one piece of the pie that's got certain ideologies from a global view, and that just doesn't fit with Australia. And again, I keep coming back to this policy development cycle. They get briefed only from one side, and I guess our views are really discounted out. They're not valued scientifically. So it's very frustrating.
But it's not only just you and your lobby groups like AgForce and cane growers and things like that. It's people with a long history of working for the government in the field, on the land, and have 30 or 40 years expertise on the ground, giving great advice, actually being out there in the woodlands and on the farms and having a look at the ground and the erosion problems and that. They just dismiss people with that sort of experience in favour of academics and people with a particular bent. Like, I thought the treatment of Bill Burrows and his papers for the submission into the Vegetation Management Act, Amendment Act, I was absolutely disgusted in the fact that they didn't take any of that into account. He's got the history there. He's got the photographs going back, nearly 100 years in regards to woodlands and what things look like, to show the evidence of what was, what is, and what could be, sort of thing. And yet nothing in regards to all those meetings that they had. I mean, they had about 20 town hall meetings in the consultation, as they call it. They had 712 submissions, but not one word of that act was changed between what it was put up and what was passed. And I just find that absolutely, sort of intolerable in a democratic society, that we have such valuable input and it's so readily dismissed because they've already got this preconceived notion and this is what's going to happen. End of story.
So, and that's a good point, Bill. And really, it's about that top-down policy development approach where they know best. And a lot of those experts that have built up many years in the field, like Bill Burrows and that, because they don't really, it's a different narrative to the ideological narrative of a number of governments and groups. If it doesn't fit the narrative, it doesn't get through the door, Bill. And it's as simple as that. There's been, and till this very day as well, there's a number of experts who are saying this legislation is wrong. Many parts of different acts are wrong, but it just doesn't suit the narrative of the government of the day. And so it doesn't get through. So really, a lot of that research that is being done scientifically through a lot of government agencies is being politicised through political ideology. And that's what you're finding that gets rolled out in a lot of policies. And that's why they're just so ridiculous when it comes to on-ground implementation.
The other thing with these sort of legislation and that is there's no KPIs, key performance indicators. So the thing is, if you introduce legislation and it's supposed to do this and it doesn't do that, or does it poorly, or doesn't get any improvement, then surely it should be rejigged or something. But in the case of the Vegetation Management Act, it's actually hurt productivity. And that's not one thing the government should be doing, is growing the pie. If an indebted government needs anything, it needs money and revenue to come in, and for that it needs industries to grow, be more productive and generate more income to give more taxes. But they don't seem to focus on that. It's just this way or the highway, and be damned if the productivity goes down the drain or you force people off the land so you don't have any productivity.
Definitely. And it's really, when you look at it too, a lot of those specialist skills that were available in the government have disappeared, and you've got to go to consultants now, or those skills just aren't there at all. And a lot of those skills you need to actually meet the guidelines or the regulations of a number of different acts and policies. So, and we see it too, just in regards to the way government has developed these different legislation in isolation of others. So you can see, to me, an example would be the Vegetation Management Act. And they're spruiking now how quite recently, in the last couple of days, you've seen the government and their NGO friends come out and say what a great thing it is that we've got this really hard, like, regulatory framework in place for vegetation management protection. It's we're decreasing the amount of remnant vegetation that's cleared each year, blah, blah, blah. But that's developed in isolation. And then you move over to, say, the government's Biosecurity Act and state's biosecurity system, which it leads. And there's a lot of impacts from them having a very weak biosecurity system. And when it comes to a lot of widespread invasive species, doing a lot more impacts on biodiversity and remnant vegetation than any illegal clearing or regulatory framework that was recently introduced through the Veg Act. So it's appeared in isolation, but they're linked. One's hurting the other. It's just a ridiculous narrative from the government.
Oh, that's their forte. But the other thing is that this inability to sort of manage your own property in regards to regrowth, revegetation, and that, there's a number of factors that come into play, especially for graziers in particular. I mean, you get regeneration of new growth. It's spindly, garbage, bloody woodland sort of thing. Cattle can't move for it. Then on top of that, those regrowths, most of it's eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is, it's about the biggest grass killer you could ever have. The leaf litter, then also the nutrients and the water it sucks up is detrimental to grasslands. We don't seem to, or the government doesn't seem, and its people in Brisbane don't seem to grasp the importance of grassland versus, scrub, if you know what I mean. There's different, they just don't get it. I mean, it's the grass that holds the soil together. Yes, trees and that are good for holding the hills together, slopes and all that sort of thing. But the most important thing to have is good ground cover, good grass cover that slows down the erosion, and not only just slows down, but also helps absorb water into the soil, so you get less runoff, and also it gives you more groundwater, so all your crops and that and anything else can last longer on the land between rainfall events, which is pretty critical in regional Queensland.
Oh, definitely. And like a question I'd like to, something I'd like to find out more about is just how many permits has the Queensland government issued for vegetation thinning, and about that encroachments on all our grasslands and that. Have they issued any permits for vegetation thinning encroachment? I'd be interested, and I think if they have, it'd be a very small number. What is the impact of vegetation and thinning and encroachment? What's that impacting on our bottom line? What's that impacting on our biodiversity? And it also relates to the lack of fire management, and what you're allowed to do with fire now generally is also impacting on that encroachment, vegetation thickening. It's all linked together, unfortunately.
I think one of the things I noticed when Bill Burrows put his submission in, that he had a few photos there of the encroachment. I think it would have been Mulga, I suppose, down in the south, in the southwest area. Now it had pictures of 50 odd years ago, and there was only small stands here and there, and there wasn't that many large trees, but there was a lot of grass cover.
Yep.
Now, you move forward 50 years, the whole place is saturated with mulga. There's almost no ground cover because mulga is not very friendly to grasses as well. And the other thing that happens is, biodiversity starts to disappear. When you start to become a monoculture of woodlands, it starts to change the habitat areas. And really, one of the greatest things you can have is a mix, a few tall trees here, a small stand of woodland, but mostly grass. And most of our marsupial animals, they've always been plains animals, or done better. They're not forest animals. Most of them are not really forest animals for a start. But but what we've done is change the habitat so much. I mean, like that photo with Bill Burrows, it basically showed 75% of the land had been taken over by mulga. That's just a ridiculous situation. And like you say, those sort of vegetations are very susceptible to high temperature burn rates of fire. Those things go up in a flash, and they're very intensive.
So, Bill, that you can see the way with a lot like how legislation, if it's poorly built and formed, and not, I guess, it doesn't take advice from those experts in the field. It actually produces perverse environmental outcomes, and that is, you get less biodiversity in regions where there should be more, through more thickening, encroachment, through more wildfires. Also, like with the Veg Act, in restrictiveness and how you go about managing. Again, I'll say it, invasive species, again, that leads to more fires. it leads to more gully erosion depending on the species, invasive species, and it leads to more stream bank erosion, right, and remnant vegetation destruction. So yeah.
But here's the issue. These things changes. They can see these things happening, but they don't have any mechanism to say, well, let's review this after so long, see where we're having shortcomings, and maybe we have to tweak things. It's like, no, we are God. We have decided this. This is, the law according to us. End of story. There's no decent review process to find out whether the system is work, and that goes for up in the northern sector where we've got the reef to deal with. Yeah. There's no real new measurements to say, well, we can prove now that there's less sediment or there's less this. They haven't got it in the first place. Their measurements were so doubtful anyway.
That's right.
We still have this situation where they won't ever sort of say, oh, maybe we didn't get it completely right, and maybe we're hurting productivity adversely for no gain. But they don't seem to be interested in sort of that sort of approach whatsoever, a review.
And that's a real hard, and that's a review to make sure you're meeting the objectives of the Act. And how can you do that without making sure you do a real full-on review? Bill, how often does that happen? And if it happens, it's just an in-house review anyway, where the information reviewed is the information that's been allowed to be reviewed. So it's very done in isolation. And again, you don't get the real outcomes from poorly formed legislation. There seems to be a very separate, and this is to me, and this is only my own opinion too, like when we look back at the state government through the 70s, 80s, 90s, especially when I was involved in the 90s, early 2000s, like they really wanted to work and learn with landholders side by side. And but now it's, and there was, I guess, a lot more that connections with the bush. There was a lot more connections with rural and regional areas. And as time's gone on, there's less connectivity between metropolitan areas and the bush and rural and regional. And you see that gap widening. And so you get that lack of understanding, and that all that follows through in the lack of connectiveness when you come to develop legislation and policy. And you can see what's being developed now is so off kilter and so ridiculous. It's nearly to a point, well, one, it's dangerous, and it's downright sending us all backwards. And one of my main gripes is you see these NGOs, I'm not going to mention any names, but many people on this program would know who they are. And they really love cherry picking information, don't they? And they really love cherry picking how anything to get a whack on rural and regional people, to downgrade us. To me, it's a bit of a deception where people really, what's been happening, Bill, we've let this slip. We haven't been on guard to what people have been saying about us. These groups have been saying about us in the cities. They haven't been saying good things about us, Bill. Unfortunately, mate. And people need to wake up and think that these groups are right into deception and misinformation. They're painting landholders as environmental vandals. And as you know, we're anything but environmental vandals. Why would we want to destroy the land that we want to keep for generations and what we make money out of? So there's a lot of mistruths being told. And I think one of the problems, I guess, that we're all guilty of is we haven't stood up and said, well, enough's enough. What you're telling is not the truth. And so that's what drives me. And it gets me frustrated to a degree too when you talk to politicians and go, geez, Jim, I had no idea it was that bad. I didn't know about that. And, these are senior politicians, are supposed to be briefed to the eyeball. But the problem is, Bill, who are they getting briefed by? Someone with a certain ideological bent saying, well, no, that's what's really happening, Minister. Trust us. Trust the science.
the other issue is you're right about the disconnection between southeast Queensland and rural Queensland.
Yeah.
And the fact that the things like the policy areas and the input for policy areas is being pulled right back into that central thing. And we don't have the people in regional positions, whether it's DPI or some government research area, say up at Lakelands or something that's got completely valuable input and sort of has the right to put in input into policy. We don't seem to have that connection anymore. I remember as a kid in West Australia going down to friends' place at Katanning, and it was broad acre wheat farms and that. They can look a bit confronting in the dry season to the naked eye sort of thing. And with how the sheep come in there after the crops and that, and you think, gee, this is not real great land. But then you come back in the growing season and gee, shoot, there's nice big stalks of nice green growing wheat and that. So they must be doing something right. But the thing is, my friend's father was just the manager, but they regularly had people. I think there was people based with the government in Katanning, and they used to come out regularly and cycle around the wheat farms and sort of give information about what updates have been happening, and kept really in contact with the farmers. But now it's just, all right, you're there and we're 1,000 miles away, and we're not going to talk to you, but we're going to tell you what's best for you. And it seems to have changed so much in that time.
Oh, look, it does. And that's it frustrates the hell out of me and a lot of our members as well. Like it comes down to a point when they were doing consultation with the new reef regulations, the reef protection regulations. And, the government people there are a lot of areas in the southern part of the reef catchments where we're in the last catchment south, the Burnout Mary River catchment. And they weren't going to even do any public consultation meetings down here to talk about it. People didn't realise what was being proposed and what restrictions and regulations that would be forced on them. And really, when we did get them to come out, we had a town hall type meeting. We always have town hall type meetings. We had 200 people there, and the government people didn't like that. They were actually, can I say, they were a bit offended, Bill, that they have so many people that made them feel a bit uncomfortable asking questions. And so what they did, they put a restriction on the number of people that could go into future consultation sessions to make them feel more comfortable. Now, that's how far we've slipped in policy development and real consultation in this country. And again, I'll come back to it. That's why we're getting such poor outcomes. And that's why people are just saying, well, where are they getting this stuff from? How can they think this is going to be workable? A lot of the people in the cities that get fed the propaganda by the ministers and their minions are believing this stuff. There's so many mistruths out there. If it wasn't so serious, it'd be laughable. People are just not getting told the truth. And I guess from a PRA perspective, and that's where we want to join with other groups to try and get the truth out there. So, we're doing the best we can. We've got a few big things planned. So hopefully, you'll get to see them.
I think the other thing is, with people in the cities and that, life is hectic. They've got a lot of commuting time to sort of deal with. They're just not that engaged. The information is just a couple of second grab on the TV or a headline on the paper. There's no in-depth, thought or research.
Analysis,
and most of them now are completely disconnected even from their food chain. Coles and Woolies is obviously the place where food grows, and that's all you've got to know about and how much you pay at the thing. They don't have any of this connection with the rural. And this is something a lot of people don't seem to get. This is something that's only started probably in the 50s, where we were major majorly populated in the regions, just as we're in the cities, but the regions were big driving forces, and they also had a big voting base. The number of seats in the capital cities was still not that high. I think if you even go back to, but Queensland's a bit different. We had this malapportionment system, but even up to the Fitzgerald inquiry, we had nearly 50 regional seats compared to about 32 in what you now call Southeast Queensland. But of course, since then, Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast has grown up. Now they've got I think there's 73 seats within 250 kilometres of the CBD, and that only leaves us roughly 20 in the outer region sort of thing. So we haven't got the voting power, and that's why the narrative is always aimed at those around Brisbane and Gold Coast and things like that. And they just chew it up. And that's the same for Melbourne and Sydney, the same sort of thing. It's the same narrative because the politicians are going to want to win these areas. You want to feed them the story that best suits their narrative and their way of thinking, and that's the first priority. Then they give the regions a bit of thought after that. I don't know if we can really get urban, people in from Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, and Gold Coast back into the thinking of the regions are important sort of thing, and we need them to grow and prosper. It doesn't seem to come into their equation, and it's certainly not put to them by the government anyway.
You raise some good points there, because there is such a disconnect, and people in cities, like just look what they've got now. I was down there last week, a presentation in Ipswich, looking at the real impacts of these renewable solar and wind and what it's doing to the environment. But it's about, and we heard from a number of people there that have got private property issues when it comes to owning residential property that's sited near a lot of these, say, mega dumps, and a lot of decreases in property value through the ongoing offensive smell and stuff like that. And it's really started to affect them. Or some other people complaining that they can't use their parks in a lot of all that new development south of Ipswich because the density of fire ant infestations there. Again, that decreases the value of the property in that area. Like you said, you picked up on before, there's a lot of rezoning issues. I know in some areas of around Brisbane there, just to get a tree removed from your backyard, just to get it assessed, and that initially takes up to a couple of $1,000s before you even talk about taking the tree out. So there is issues that we can relate and build there. I think the major populations in the southeast corner, it's hard to get the message through because governments and their NGOs have really big propaganda machines built. And these propaganda machines are very powerful. If you look at the propaganda machines of rural and regional people, what do you got? What is there?
Sparseness.
That's right. And then you look at the propaganda machines of some of the, I guess, I'm not going to say left-leaning, because when it comes to, this is all about policy and getting good policy. By those people, they might have vested interest in environmental activism. They don't like the truth getting told about, let's take it for example, how the energy transformation into the green energy transformation is actually probably affecting the environment more than global warming's ever going to affect it. When you look at the thousands of hectares that are being cleared, right now of koala habitat and stuff, it's just ridiculous. And I guess that's the story we're trying to paint, is to make them aware that what you're being told is actually not the total truth. And if you were told the total truth, you might have a bit of a different view of a lot of the government policy.
I think the other thing is too, our representatives, well, take Cairns and even, well, you got Cook, Barron River, Mulgrave and Cairns itself, that's 4 Labor seats. You got 3 in Townsville. The first LNP one is Burdekin, and then you've got a few more Labor. I think there's 11 Labor in the first northerly 17 seats from the tip down. Now, they don't do exactly a great job of representing the concerns of regional farmers and growers and things like that. They're pretty good at coming back and giving the messaging that comes out of Brisbane. And that's a concern. These people really don't look after, well, my view is they don't look after the particular interests of their communities and the wider communities. They're simply here to give the messaging that's coming out of their parties in headquarters in Brisbane. So it's going to be difficult to have any wins anywhere when you've already got this level of bias against you.
It is, Bill, and I guess we've got to look at. We can all in our power to actually get the truth out there, but politicians will sniff the breeze and look at what's happened in Western Australia, Bill, when you look at the primary numbers of Labor since this bill was introduced, has dropped 15% from the polls. So politicians being politicians, they will sniff the breeze. And like when you think about it, property rights is growing. Like the issue of property rights is growing, private property rights. And I guess we're looking at making a bigger issue because it's being under attack for many years now, and it's really, we're starting to see an exponential jump in more of our private property rights being eroded before our eyes, and supposedly to save the environment, to have better environmental outcomes. People don't really understand, but people in power, that healthy economies, healthy farms, healthy regions, you get better environmental outcomes. You get better social outcomes. So there seems to be a real gap in knowledge there, unfortunately.
I think we've had the issue with the Vegetation Management Act and the general using the environment against primary producers. The other thing that, like you say, mentioned the renewable energy, that's starting to become a serious issue in regards to transmission lines, especially down in New South Wales. There's a whole lot of unhappy people down there. The wind farms themselves, in regards to their encroachment on property, private property rights, and also the lack of support from local councils. I mean, I've been getting emails and that for a couple of projects down there, and basically the local councils are sold out their constituents for these prepayments or community payments. That's not the way to treat the blind. People are going to say, well, I'm just not going to vote for these people, or you're going to have groups pop up and run as a group against these types of surrenders of people's rights and amenity. And that's what a lot of people don't sort of seem to understand. Amenity, I mean, is very important to everyone. It's not just for the landowner, it's the people who go past, it's the people who come to spend their tourist dollars. If the amenity disappears, all those things dry up as well.
Definitely, you raised some good points there. First, like in regards to the local government issue, as we know under the Planning Act, they're the ones that make decisions for small solar and wind farms to a degree. Talking to a number of mayors though, who say if they were to refuse a number of these developments, they get taken to court, and it costs a lot of money. The really planning framework for a local government. It needs a lot of work, and they need more support to help them make these decisions if they want to knock back these applications from these renewable developments. There's a bit of a gap there that the government needs to fill to give local governments more capability in that area. I do concur with you that local governments just see the money and think these new developments are going to be great for the region. But in all reality, I can see landholders' point of view that they might make some money out of renewable developments. I know there's some good money in some wind farms, solar farms, yeah. But, what about the guy next door or the guy next door to that? And when you get one renewable project, well, then it might attract more renewable projects. And, like where I live here, we're in a hub, we'll get clusters. And there's transmission lines around with the Barumba pumped hydro. And there's heaps of people talking, and I'm pleased you brought it up, Bill, about that natural amenity. Because, there's a big tourist drive through here where people drive out to the bunyas, and all they're going to see is these big 80-metre pylons with big 500 kV lines running around, and then big clusters of solar farms and wind farms. But apparently you listen to the Premier and people like seeing that. That's very scenic, Bill.
The other issue too, the problem with the councils are pretty well snookered, reading this stuff out of Victoria in particular, that the EPA has basically lowered conditions so much, especially in regards to noise and other things, that the councils really can't fight the things, and it's definitely not going to get any support from the state government. But here's the rub. The whole point is the local governments, for all the things that people say, well, it's the third level of government, it's garbage. There are only two levels of government in Australia, state and federal. What local councils are simply administration arms of their state government. They've been given some powers or responsibilities without a lot of the authority and without the funding. But they've taken on the work. I mean, the planning might lay with the councils to a degree, but let's face it, if there's a dispute, you just run to QCAT or VCAT or someone else and get it overturned. And if the councils want to fight it, the ratepayer ends up getting stuck with a $400,000, $500,000 bill. It doesn't make good sense, but that's the way our system is at the moment.
We really see, and this is going on like Victoria a number of years ahead of us, but we really see this rush to renewables. When any public servants or state government-owned corporations, which there's a number of them now, running out with this renewable stuff, whenever they rush things, usually bad decisions are made. Public servants works best when it works a bit slower, Bill. I've found in the past, and methodically goes through stuff. When they rush, they really do make mistakes. And this is what this is. It's a real rush. There's been no really landscape type of assessment of the environmental, social and economic impacts of this, and of that, let's say, regional wide impact on natural amenity, what you mentioned before, Bill. So there's some really big gaps in this whole renewable transmission process. And really, I've got to concur to what the Nationals are saying at a federal level is let's just stop and plan properly. Like, if these are intergenerational assets that are going to be here for a lifetime, shouldn't we be making sure that the framework and governance strategy is in place before we spend billions and billions, a lot of it foreign money, in rolling these things out, and they're going to be in the best place? Well, I've got a good story of a fellow that is from central Queensland in a reef catchment, and he had a reef audit on his property in the last 12 months. And he still hasn't heard anything back from that audit. That was 12 months ago. So he's still in limbo. But basically, he's near an area where, from his property, you can see the adjoining range at the back of Rockhampton there, and how they're levelling that and putting these big wind turbines up. And he actually did say to one of the regulation officers there, you hear about my bare ground here and my veg management. What about on top of the mountain? What are they doing? And basically they said, we've got no power to stop them. That's not where we're here. And so what landholders are actually seeing, landowners, it's the inequity of it all, Bill. You're saying I've got to manage my land here to get these outcomes, but I just look a couple of k's that way, and here you are knocking down remnant vegetation on the top of a mountain range, putting hundreds of kilometres of unsealed roads in. And where do you think all that sediment's going to go? On top of a catchment. But geez, that's right. But they can come onto my place if I've got a bare area the size of my kitchen table and do a reef audit. But not so on the top of mountain ranges when you've got foreign companies building wind developments. So the inequity of it all, people don't realise that, just how what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander. And I think a lot of people are starting to wake up.
But you've got to understand, you're the whipping boys. That's it. That's what you're there for.
The whipping boy. Yes.
but here's the thing. I mean, it's amazing how fast wheels can turn in the government for some things. I mean, the establishment of that hydro group department.
Queensland Hydro.
I think it was basically on a napkin one day, paying a few people hundreds of thousands of dollars the next day sort of for their positions, and then writing up all the stuff for what they're going to do. But the pumped hydros, I mean, people think people in general think, oh, this is a good idea, well, when there's excess power, we'll just pump it up the hill, and then it's there for when we need additional power. But they don't get the environmental situation. The one for the Pioneer Burdekin's one, the $12 billion one that they're talking about, it's right on a very interesting sort of landscape and rainforest area, fairly unique. It's right on the edge of that. But the other thing is, a hydro dam provides zero amenity. You can't do anything with it. It's a dam and two ponds. You got the ponds either half empty and each, or one's completely empty and one's completely full, depending. So you can't go boating on. You can't fish on it. The damage around the edges, you can't have any wildlife there because the water's going in and out, in and out, in and out. So it's got no stability in regards to being a good habitat, and it gives nothing to the people of the region. It's there. They're spending $12 billion to harness the votes of people in southeast Queensland. And the thing that really gripes me is what they're going to come out and say, well, aren't we good looking after the regions with this development? We're investing $9,000 per capita in central Queensland. Aren't we great? But that pumped hydro dam doesn't do anything for your economy. It doesn't give you one drop of drinking water. It doesn't give you a drop of irrigation water, and it's actually ruined a lot of public amenity at the same time. Yet they pat themselves on the back. I mean, how stupid are regional people to put up with this? This is what gets me.
And that's right, Bill. Like, you can already see that happening with the pumped hydro. I think that's got a budget of 14.2 billion plus transmission, which could be another 800 to another billion, and it'll be more than that. The whole thing could be more than 20 billion, and the mind boggles. And you're right, it's already been with the new CEO, that it was announced recently that it's going to be good for the whole southeast corner. The amount of work that's going to be there, the amount of economic benefits to the community that's going to be there. And then I guess that we just point out, well, look at our roads. Look at the conditions of our road network, our bridges. look at the key basic services. I've still got to wait 3 months to get into the doctor here at Mergen. But, you know, we can go and spend 20 billion on a pumped hydro, which is old technology. And by the time it's actually finished, there's probably better battery technology if you believe in the emission, the climate change narrative. So again, you're spending heaps of money. And like a lot of the solar farms and that have been built around Gympie now, like there's a big spike at construction time where you get a lot of people having jobs. But guess what, Bill? Those people aren't from the local area. They're all from out of town contracting. So what is the benefit? We get motels booked out for a while. Our roads are put under pressure. A few bridges get wrecked. What benefit is that you hear Minister Bowen blowing on about it. You hear Minister de Brenny, like just the amount of jobs and investment going here. It's going to be such a good thing for these regions, and really it is the total opposite. It is destroying our natural amenity. It's destroying the social fabric, and it's destroying the environment. And we don't even really know if we're going to have a reliable power system at the end of it. So to me, it is a total disaster.
Well, the thing is, you can't spend what I think Queensland to get we'll never get baseload power out of your renewables anyway. But you're going to have to spend something like just for the solar and wind farms, you're going to have to spend in the order of $160 billion. And that's not for the interconnection yet. No, you've got to have the interconnection. $160 billion, how is that ever going to deliver you cheap energy to sort of get back into manufacturing and grow the pie? I mean, the people who like saying this is going to deliver a benefit to the people in southeast Queensland, it's going to deliver you higher energy prices forever and a day. So we're all slow learners, or people are slow learners or easily fooled, but time will tell, I suppose. Maybe after 3 or 4 or 5 years, your electricity bill going up 25% annually or something, you might, Australians might start to twig, well, maybe this isn't a good idea, but it's a bit late then because you've wiped out the rest of your reliable power sources. But we're now faced with a new conundrum in regards to it's bad enough with the renewables and that tramping across your property, and also miners. Miners have a fair whack at land use as well. Coming onto property for coal seam gas.
Yep.
But that's been an ongoing thing. I haven't heard too many confrontations lately, and it was fairly much in the years ago. Has that sort of settled down, or is it's just become a fait accompli and people just sort of, well, it is what it is?
No, look, there's still some really big issues in regards to subsidence and people being unaware their properties were being drilled underneath them with the directional drilling and not being aware of it. So look, that issue hasn't gone away. I guess you can compare the rollout of CSG, coal seam gas, to a degree with what's happening with the rollout of the renewables, except when miners come, that they've got a right to what's under your land. So it's a little different with renewables, that like sometimes they're asking your permission and buying in that way. But like there's things that we could probably learn out of the CSG rollout and apply it to the renewables. But to me, we're just playing catch up. All this activity, it's the cart before the horse. All this activity out there with no real planning. I guess the integrated system plan put out by the Australian energy marketing operator is nothing more than a bit of a bubble, or with these renewable energy zones. There's no real kind of in-depth planning associated with it. And then even when you go into the state's energy and job plan, that has been much touted on by a number of ministers and the Premier herself, there's really no context in there. the scary thing is you've got this statewide energy and job plan, how they're going to roll out all these renewables and link it all together with all the pumped hydro and battery storage. There's been real, and under that you have these regional development plans. And I know for the one in Wide Bay here, there was very limited consultation with local governments and with the communities at large. But you read the Wide Bay regional plan, it's going, we're all happy to have this great big renewable hub here. And all this land's coloured and graded of where all these wind farms in. And you talk to people about the regional plan, they go, what plan's that? They don't know anything about the plan, Bill.
That's it. The new wave that's going to sweep from the west, we came out of the west. Well, there's legislation in the west that's probably going to be rolled out across Australia that's turned a few heads and people are starting to notice. So I did have Tony Seabrook on a couple of weeks ago talking about the Aboriginal Heritage and Cultural Heritage Act.
Yep.
And the formation of LACs and the fact that it affects anyone with more than basically a quarter acre, 1,100 square metres, which is a suburban lock in a lot of places in Perth. So the reality might be coming to urban areas very soon in regards to property rights and what you think you're entitled to do or not entitled to do with this legislation. Is there any discussion on this side of the country in regards to preparing for such onslaughts in the future?
Definitely. Like, we've got a number of new members that are from Western Australia, actually. And we also have a number of members coming to us now, and new members too, saying, have you heard about this? We're joining this because we think it's going to come here soon. We need people to stand up and actually and fight it. Really, any kind of model that's even near what's been introduced into Western Australia is really going to have some real negative impacts on top of what we're experiencing now with this renewable rollout and all the other veg legislation, the reef legislation. It's going to add to the regulatory burden to a level where we're hamstrung. We can't do much at all, Bill. Just watch our vegetation get thicker, overtaken with weeds, and watch the pretty windmills and solar farms being dotted around us. When we can't even go and dig a hole unless we've got a permit.
It's actually regressive. People don't understand. We need development and moving forward, and we need to grow the pie. But governments seem to be embracing these things that do everything but that. And the thing I noticed about the West Australian legislation, it was formulated very in-house sort of thing within the government.
Yep.
Zero consultation and just, well, here you are, and this is the day that's going to happen. And even the government wasn't prepared for it. It's now enacted, it's now law, but they haven't even got the LACs in place, the local Aboriginal Heritage councils, to deal with the thing. And the other thing is that they can't actually discern who is actually entitled to be a LAC in certain areas, because the history of the individual Aboriginal groups has dissipated over time. And we saw a comical situation a couple of weeks ago when they were opening a freeway or something in Perth. And there was an argument between two Indigenous groups in regards to who was entitled to carry out this smoking ceremony and get the $1,000 that's part of it. I mean, we're just going to be bombarded with all this sort of stuff, and no one's going to get any progress. No, and the government's got to shoot itself in the foot, because without progress, you're not going to get greater revenue.
Well, and that's right. Like, farm productivity will slip if that legislation's left to stand at it as it is. Like, that is just ridiculous. And again, like when we first started this conversation with you, Bill, we talked about poor policy development and poor legislation, the way it's developed, and it's developed in isolation of the people who it will be implemented against. And when you have people, 600 people turning up to a hall meeting to talk about the negative impacts of that cultural heritage legislation, you can see that there's been an issue with the way it's been developed. Like, surely the government of the day must see there's a problem when you've got so many people who are going to be impacted by the legislation, calling it out for what it is. They should go back and do their homework and actually develop real workable regulation.
The only problem is that all those 600 people and even further around only come from one regional seat or something like that. It doesn't make one iota difference to what's going to happen in all the other seats in the city normally. However, with this act, it may come home to roost with you in metropolitan Perth, because you want it now, got a nice house and you want to put up a pergola. Well, you have to go and find $1,000 to start and get someone to come and visit your place to make sure you're not disrupting anything, and get a tick off, and then you can start your permit process. So maybe this is a wake-up call for urban Australia. The other thing is too, we've got too many issues where real small groups have wield too much influence over the government. I mean, West Australia's now facing a live sheep export ban, and that's at the bequest of a very small group of people, very noisy people, getting those sort of things. And the government has started to take too much notice from minority groups rather than the majority that are actually creating the wealth. But do you think we need to sort of get some sort of understanding? And this is my personal belief. If you have freehold, it extinguishes everything, every claim on the land, end the story. And I think that's got to be the first thing we've got to get over the line to make sure people's property rights are entrenched for the future.
Definitely, there needs to be some kind of ongoing protection of freehold and what freehold means. What are you protected from having freehold? Because now, like, it's under open attack every day. And look, if freehold, like what's happening in Western Australia, they're looking at potentially putting a case forward where it's extinguishing, as native title, it's extinguishing cultural heritage. Well, that'll be interesting to follow and see where that ends up. But you're right, it's like we need a protective ring around freehold. Look, we understand when there's public infrastructure required, there has to be some acquisition in certain circumstances. But if that was when that's exhausted and land has to be resumed, well, that must be the best possible price, and all the processes around that need to be in support of the landowner. So yeah, look, watch this space. But if there needs to be some kind of protective ring, some Bill of Rights that protects freehold, and if we don't stand up and put that case forward, why have freehold?
Well,
why have it?
Well, it isn't the New World Order is you own nothing and we'll be happy? Yeah. Well, look, there's a lot of unhappy people now. That people just say, well, that's just a conspiracy theory, but gee whiz, it's getting a bit concerned for a lot of people at the moment.
Oh, well, just get onto the World Wide Web and just look up United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals and just have a look at them. And that's where a lot of the policy that's being mimicked and put through at a national and state level is coming from. And that's where you get the top-down policy legislative development and not the bottom-up grassroots policy development. And that's why a lot of the policy and legislation coming through, it's hurting us. We haven't been involved in its development, and it's producing negative impacts on our lives, livelihood, and the environment. So it's no good for us in the long term.
Maybe with the level of debt the Commonwealth and the state governments have got, that maybe outside influences beyond our shores have now got a means of coercion on our government to get things enacted. And that's where the downward flow is coming from. Because we do seem to be caught up with a lot of agreements and that from overseas that we've got to meet, and they seem to impact right down to your piece of land at the moment.
Well, that's right. Case in point, look at the Kyoto Agreement, where we just gave away a lot of our vegetation rights on freehold land, and we've never really been properly compensated for that to this day, Bill. And that was an international agreement where we've signed up to many international agreements that aren't good for Australia. It's like we just like being bad to us. I just don't get it. It's when you think about a lot of these agreements and what we're doing to our own country, you wouldn't manage a farm that way. You'd go broke.
No, well, it's a bit like self-mutilation, I think, somehow. But no. Anyway, look, we've gone over the hour, but we've had an interesting discussion. If you want to finish off on any sort of general review of the conversation, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, look, I'd just like to say that, and let's get back to, we're not a member, we're not a political group, we're not a member of any political party. But I would be ringing your local politician and saying, what are they doing to protect your private property rights? And what is their party doing to protect your private property rights? It's all right for an individual MP saying, I'm very concerned about it. Yes. But I mean, what's the policy of their party when it comes to it? Because we need to know that there's people out there that are actually thinking about the constant erosion of our property rights and freehold in general. And like a smart politician would sniff the air and know that the smell in the air now with what's happened in Western Australia, and I think is a combination of a lot of things that have happened in the past that is a really rising to the top now, and property rights is becoming a massive issue, and politicians particularly need to make sure that they do everything possible to stop the erosion of our property rights, because that's what's happening and it continues to happen. And look, I just ask people to get in behind organisations like Property Rights Australia, look, to help protect what they hold so dear, what's been in their families for generations, what they go to work for every day. And that's what I say to people in urban areas too, like your house is your kingdom. You want to make sure that it's protected, and you've got to say what happens to it. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, Jim, look, thanks very much for your time tonight.
No worries.
If you can just stay there for a second, I'll introduce next week's show and just have a quick chat to you off air. Mm-hmm. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I'll have Professor Alan Dale joining me. Alan was on about 18 months ago, and we discussed government regulation and how it needs to be improved in regards to the process to speed things up, especially for regional development. But this time we'll be talking about water, and in particular the vertical catchment. It's because it has been the scene of a number of issues from the 2020 election or 22 election with Hell's Gate, and it's that disappearance of that. And recently in the last couple of budgets, state and federal, a lot of water projects have been scrubbed or sent back for review. So a critical issue in especially northern Queensland and probably most of Australia is water, and we need to make sure we get the best outcomes for both agriculture and our cities going forward for water security. So please join me next week. Thank you.